Welcome to the 2022 State of Automation in the Finance Office, survey results and panel discussion. My name is Neil Brown, Executive Director of the Controllers Council, and before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. First, please use the GoToWebinar control panel to ask questions. Second, we'll have 4 polling questions, so please, again, use the GoToWebinar control panel to vote and benchmark against your peers. And finally, a frequently asked question, you will receive an email link to this webcast archive, so no need for notes or screenshots. So with that, I'd love to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, Auditoria AI, which increases finance teams' speed, accuracy, and efficiency using intelligent smart bots to automate manual and time-consuming accounts payable and receivable processes while deriving greater cash position visibility. Auditoria integrates with industry-leading ERP and financial applications, including Bill.com, Conga, Coupa, Oracle ERP Cloud, Oracle NetSuite, Sage Intacct, Workday, and collaboration tools such as Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm very pleased to introduce Elaine Nowak, Director of Product Marketing at Auditoria, and Nick Ezzo, VP of Marketing at Auditoria AI. Welcome.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be here.
All right, well, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, super. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about an overview of the survey and the key findings that were found. We'll hit on the topic of automation and the fact that it's here to stay. We'll talk about how repetitive work is ruining corporate finance. And then we'll get into some of the challenges in the finance office, and then the need to embrace automation or end up stagnated. And then lastly, the steps to get started on an automation journey. So first off, the survey overview and the key findings.
So next slide, please. Over the last 3 years, we've conducted a survey of finance professionals across the globe. In 2020, we surveyed 200 people. In 2021, we surveyed around 450 people. And this year, we topped out at about 650 respondents. And we asked them a whole bunch of questions about the challenges that they had in the back office. And one of the things that we found out is that automation is definitely here to stay. It's no longer a nice to have. And corporate finance is beginning to step up and embrace automation or getting left behind, or even worse, becoming overwhelmed and overworked as a result of the burnout, turnover, and the greater risk in the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that accounts payable once again led the way as having the most manual processes. That's the 3rd year in a row. Time spent checking and updating data was identified as the biggest challenge across the finance back office. Inaccurate or partially complete information and lack of responsiveness from employees, vendors, and our customers were the biggest daily pain points. And activities that took up the most time for finance teams actually differed by role. CFOs stated that analysis, analyzing the data for insights and for reports took up the most time. At the VP director manager level, it was gathering data for analysis. And at the finance specialist, the professional sort of the staff level, it was execute, audit, and compliance related activities. And priorities for the coming year led with focus on process improvement, and that was followed by invest in new technologies to improve processes. So let's just talk a little bit more about the key findings. Next slide. Most respondents, this is 61.8% when asked, felt that their finance back office was not sufficiently automated. That's a good portion of the people that we surveyed. Accounts payable, as I said earlier, but also receivable, they were both ranked as having the most manual work. And that, again, those two are always at the top of having those manual work tasks and workflows, 3rd year running. Time spent on manual or repetitive tasks is the biggest challenge in the finance office, and that was followed closely by time checking and updating data. And then the lack of responsiveness was the most significant pain point, and 1/5 of the respondents, that's 21.2%, say that they will implement advanced levels of analytics and reporting in the next year. So now let's go into a little bit more about automation and the results that we found. But first, we'd like to put a poll question and sort of take the pulse of the audience that's here with us today. So the first poll question is going to come up for us. Which of the following best describes the level of automation in your finance back office? So this is amongst yourselves, your teams. Is it that you have no automation? Is it that you have, let's say, basic levels of automation? Is it that you have some automation, that your automation is fairly advanced? Or would you say that it's advanced or autonomous automation? So please go ahead and select one of those 5 answers as we collect the results. It's interesting to note, yeah.
I see them coming in. I can see them coming in right on the screen right now. We've got 45% of the people, almost 50% now voted.
All right. So we're asking this question that we also asked this exact question on the survey. So it'll be interesting to see if the results are going to be this similar to what we saw in the survey. So which of the following best describes the level of automation in your finance back office? 11% of those with us today said no automation, 32% said basic levels, 43% said some automation, and 11% said fairly advanced. Very small percentage said advanced or an autonomous automation. Interesting. So I think it is actually slightly different than the results from the survey, just slightly. Why don't we go ahead and pull up that next slide, Neil, and let's look at what the results were from the survey that we saw. So the majority in the survey that we took, the respondents said basic levels. So congratulations, everyone here, a little more sophisticated level of audience in terms of embracing automation. So I think that's fantastic. It was found that 44% had the basic levels of automation. So it kind of flip-flopped between the results here and the fact that some of those results said they had some automation. We also saw that in this case, it was a very small percentage that said when it came to advanced automation, they rely on technology to help them make decisions. It was only about 4.5%. Nick, thoughts on this? And
yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, my takeaway is that a good percentage of the respondents are not being well served by automation. So we see a significant opportunity there. Around 17%, if you add up that 9.8 plus the 4.5 plus the 2.8, that would be what I would call like advanced or semi-advanced. That's pretty impressive. That's good. And in this particular crowd, I think the numbers, as you pointed out, Elaine, slightly skewed toward that. So what I jotted down was we had 11 and 3% that were in the top category, whereas 11% were in the bottom category. So I think this particular audience, which is controllers, CAOs, CFOs, seem to be really embracing technology a lot more than we've seen in our broader survey. So very, very good.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's talk a little bit about another thing that we saw when we asked the question: in which areas of finance do you use automation? So it's interesting to note that even though the respondents said that the AP and AR were reported as being the most manual functional areas, they were also the areas that respondents said had the most automation. So how do you interpret those types of results? It seems kind of counterintuitive. I think that when we look into that and sort of think about how that can be, it kind of comes up to the question of that basic level of automation, right? So it might be that they have basic levels of automation, but it only covers parts of the AP or the AR process. And I think as a typically manual area in those particular areas, it would make sense that those who are automating are trying to automate these areas that do seem to be very manual, very tedious, very repetitive type work. I also would say, like, AP, they streamline the approval process, right? That at a very basic level. They might replace emailing each other, but some of that more complex parts of accounts payable could really use an automation upgrade.
Yeah, and it occurs to me as we go through this data, Elaine, that we've taken spreadsheets and we've kind of moved those into accounting software packages, cloud-based ERPs and cloud-based accounting software. So good, awesome, great. The approvals workflows for accounts payable, as you pointed out, yep, we got that. But what this tells me is that there is still a lot of manual, routine, mundane work, which is like people checking the work of other people, which, if you ask me, is not a fun job. Like, nobody ever says, hey, I'd really love to grade papers. I mean, unless you're a teacher, yeah, cool. But even teachers probably don't like grading papers. That's like, so checking other people's work is still a time-consuming activity. And then reaching out to people, hey, when am I going to get paid? Or can you approve this bill? And can you give me more information? In the last company I worked for, my good friend Maureen would walk around the hallways with her laptop, and she'd sit down at my desk and ask me about the bills that are on the laptop. Now that was pre-COVID. It's super inefficient then, probably even more inefficient today. So I think there is some opportunity that we have to automate the correspondence or the outreach between the systems and the stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of interesting to note that in this particular question, 18.6% said that we don't use automation in finance.
Wow.
So again, another significant number right there.
In 2022, don't use any automation in finance. Okay, cool. Let's change that.
Okay. The next question that we asked in the survey was, in which finance functions do you have automation in place? So specifically honing in, not necessarily on the more broader categories, but honing on more the process oriented in this question, right? So we said, was it in reports or analysis, applying, allocating cash? Was it managing spend and procurement, onboarding new customers or vendors? Was it reviewing accounts? Again, processing invoices, payments? Was it managing the period close or credit and credit applications? Or was it, did you put automation when you were looking at, the performance of your cash, or when you were looking at your collections activities? And so I think it's interesting to note that the area that had the most automation in the finance function was, creating reports or performing analysis. About 17.6% said that that's where they had their finance automation. And that was followed closely by processing invoices and payments. So thoughts on this particular one, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think this particular audience, which is like, as we said, controllers, CFOs, CAOs, they care a lot about reporting analysis. To use the nautical analogy, if you're on a ship, you really want to know what your heading is. What's your course and speed? Are you headed in the right direction? And so I think a lot of the work that's happened up till now in terms of automation has been to provide the CFO with information for her to do her job better. And so like that, I'm not surprised that we've had a lot of effort placed on the reporting and analytics. The other thing about processing payments and invoices, that's another. There have been whole cottage industries that have sprung up around AP automation and logging into a portal, uploading the invoice, being able to scan it, go through the approvals process. Super manual process, as we pointed out through our survey the last couple of years. And so that's one area that people have tackled. But again, like these other areas that have really not been sufficiently automated up till now presents a huge opportunity for people to come in and help finance folks get their life and their time back.
Yeah, and actually would point out that the functional area with the least amount of automation, according to the survey respondents, was performing collections activities. And honestly, that is an area that could really benefit because there's a ton of options out there for automating that particular process. So the fact that that is the lowest performing area in terms of administering automation to help you do your job better, definitely an area, like you said, Nick, areas that could definitely use automation.
Well, but if you think about it, like bringing cash in the organization is super important, right? Especially as we have inflation, we could be heading into a recession. Being able to pull that cash in from your customers that actually owe you money, I think that should be an area that people should focus on. It literally will be like a life and death situation for some companies if they can't collect their receivables. So that actually surprises me tremendously that we haven't had automation focused on the collections area as much as some of these other areas.
Yeah, and it's an area that can definitely see huge benefits in terms of putting automation in place and the levels of how much more quickly cash can be brought in the organization. So, so let's shift and talk a little bit about this repetitive work. We made a bold statement here. It's ruining corporate finance, right? Ruining. But before we do that, and we're going to ask another poll question to the audience and make sure that everyone here is listening and getting the participation we're looking for. So the next one is going to be launched. On a daily basis, so in your day-to-day operations, what are your pain points? So is it the identification of material errors or fraud in your financial data? Is it inaccurate or partially complete information from vendors and customers? Is it a lack of responsiveness from key stakeholders, people like your employees, your vendors, your customers? Is it managing and taking action on shared emails Or is it repetitive questions from customers and vendors? So if you could just go ahead and tell us on a daily basis, what are your pain points? So, if you think about it and you sit down at your desk and you log in, and then where is it that you find that it's the biggest issues, your biggest challenges?
Yep.
So
We get people voting. So we're at 20-some%, almost 30% of the participants. I can see a clear winner already, but let's hold the big reveal until we give people 10, 15, 20 more seconds. A lot of people haven't voted yet, so please jump in there, click your button. We'd love to have your feedback. We'd love to have your input. So okay,
yeah,
we're at 63% now.
good.
Okay, we're at a minute. All right.
All right.
So that's pretty amazing that like inaccurate or partially complete information is the clear winner. So the number one answer. And the other ones, lack of responsiveness and delayed approvals, managing tasks, managing and taking action on shared emails, and then last but not least, the identification of material errors and repetitive questions from customers and vendors. Elaine, do you want to walk us through what our audience said?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing to note that once again, it's different than what but it's interestingly close. So let's pull up the results from the survey talking about. I think it's not surprising that in the case of it, it was a lack of responsiveness. This repetitive manual tasks run rampant in the corporate office. And when you think about it, record keeping, it translates into hours spent inputting data into systems, updating old records. I really think that AP and AR tasks require a keen eye to notice trends and discrepancies in the data collected. So about a fifth of the respondents said a daily pain was inaccurate or partially complete information from vendors and customers. So it's a little different. The people here with us said that the inaccurate or partially complete information was by far the biggest winner, right? More than half of the people here. Where in our survey results, it was kind of split between the lack of responsiveness and the inaccurate or partially complete data. I wonder if, Nick, that partly has to do with the audience that we have here, maybe more senior versus when we did our survey, we definitely had members across the board from the finance office that represented it from the CFO all the way down to the staff members. So
yeah, I think you're onto something. I firmly support your hypothesis that it has to very much do with the title level, but kind of frighteningly, if this is a senior audience and they believe that like 55% of the people on this call believe that they're getting inaccurate or partially complete information from their teams, that is frightening.
Yeah.
That actually points out a pretty significant pain point. The thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that the lack of responsiveness almost tracks directly. It's like 21.3 what we have, and on my screen I'm looking at 21% from the poll we just did a minute ago. We don't have any decimal points, but like that's almost exactly the number. In fact, some of the other ones like managing and taking actions, 14% on this poll, 15% on ours, so tracks very well. So yeah, I think we've uncovered another sort of different perspective based on the title levels.
Yeah, and I think when we looked at the respondents from our survey, Nick, that it's kind of like communication was a key area, right? So it was whether it was sending that fifth follow-up email to a client with an outstanding bill or sending receipts for paid transactions, that communication, right? That constant back and forth consumes hours of valuable time. So
well,
yeah.
It's surprising to me that in 2022, with all the technology we have available today, people are still entering data manually, which is super efficient, super slow. And then, we've talked to firms like Gartner, Forrester, Constellation, and they're basically saying in the next few years, data extraction will be a completely automated exercise. That like having a person sitting down and, back in the day, accounting folks used to love, hey, they used to brag about it, my 10 key skills, I can enter so much data per minute or whatever. And 10 key skills are great. I'm not dissing that at all. But, even Gartner, Forrester, and Constellation are saying that by 2025 or 2030, that the need for sitting down with an invoice and either copying and pasting or rekeying data from a PDF or a paper invoice will be definitely a thing of the past. That is low-hanging fruit, and it's not going to be a thing anymore.
Yeah, and I think just one last note is that 15% said managing and taking action on the inbox, that shared inbox. That it is, that's a good percentage. What is that? oh, I'm terrible at math, a fifth or something, a little less, saying that's their biggest pain point, to go through emails. Like, you have to say that's got to be a very tedious task, and definitely something that there are solutions out there to not have to make that a focus for your department.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've been predicting the death of email for years, and it has not arrived. Email is not dead. In fact, I read a study recently that although there are only 7 billion people on planet Earth, there are 300 billion emails transmitted, sent, and received daily. So that is like how many times over? How many emails is that per person? So,
Oh, wow.
so that's a big deal right there itself. So email is here and it's not going anywhere. And finance and accounting are drowning in emails. We talk to some folks every day. You talk to these folks too, Elaine. We ask them, like, how many days behind are you on responding to the shared inbox? And every finance and accounting department has a shared inbox. Sometimes it's called finance or accounting, or sometimes it's called AP or AR at yourcompany.com. And we hear, like, on average, people are like 5 to 8 days behind. So if somebody says, hey, I'm going to pay my bill, can you send me a copy of the invoice? And we're literally waiting 5 to 8 days to send them a copy of the invoice so they could pay us money. I think that's crazy. And then the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, I think it's just insane. Thoughts, Elaine?
Yeah, absolutely insane. I think that kind of parlays into our next survey question, which was about the inefficient way that communication is, how that's also a friction point, right? So when we looked at these results, we asked, how much time does your team spend following up, seeking approvals, requesting documentation, and communicating with vendors, customers, and internal stakeholders each week? Almost half of the finance teams, that was, when I say that, that's in the 6 to 10 and 10 to 30 hours a week were spent following up, seeking approvals, requesting documentation, communicating with vendors, customers. That's in a week. I think that's a tremendous amount of time that's spent on this tedious, unrewarding task. I mean, nobody wants to be that babysitter, follow up, right? I think on average, the majority of finance pros, when we looked at this survey also, they spent at least one workday, 6 to 10 hours on communicating on this kind of follow-up work. And unbelievably, I think the statistic just blows my mind. 5% said they spent more than 30 hours. I mean, that's almost the equivalent of a full-time employee doing this kind of work. And it's the kind of tasks that can be automated, that there is technology available to help them with this.
Yeah, and I think we may have a slight formatting issue on our slide here. We'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the slide deck after the fact so you can actually see the data. And by the way, as part of the follow-up, we'll send you a copy of our survey, which is packaged up in a nice ebook, PDF. The green and the blue right there indicate over 30 hours. Like this 18.4%, that's people spending 10 to 30 hours every week. And the green, 5.4, are spending more than 30 hours every week following up, seeking approvals, requesting documentation, communicating with vendors, customers, and stakeholders. It's like those, I want to talk to those 5.4 people in that green wedge, because they are hating life right now. They are literally spending their entire time chasing people down to get information.
Yep, absolutely. So now let's shift and talk a little bit about the challenges. I mean, we've been talking about challenges all along, but we more specifically go into the questions that we asked. But let's also do that for the people here who are attending. We're going to launch our next poll question. So overall, what are the challenges across the back office? So we asked about your day-to-day pain points. Now we were asking the survey participants to tell us overall challenge. So when you think about the finance back office, where's the areas? Is it that you have inaccurate, burdensome, or outdated processes? Is it these portals that have to be accessed to make payments or to get paid? Is it time spent checking and updating data? Is it time spent extracting data from documents, invoices, forms, and all sorts of other things? Or is it time spent on manual or repetitive tasks? So if you could please go ahead and vote, pick the questions, pick the answer that reflects the overall challenges across the finance back office.
Yeah, so we would love to get your input. Looks like a number of people are voting. If you stepped away from your computer to go get a drink of water, please come back and vote. Looks like, we got more responses kind of pouring in. We've got about half the audience has responded right now. We'll leave it open for another 10, 15, 20 seconds. So we're starting to get some clear winners here, Elaine. I'm looking at my other computer screen to see if it matches up with what we said.
Okay, so it looks like the overall winner was time spent on manual or repetitive tasks. That is not super surprising. And then the next winner was time spent checking and updating data. So not a super surprise there. I think when we look at the results from our survey as well, um, it falls along similar lines. So let's go ahead and pull up that data. I think of note though, Nick, that no one on this call is worried about portals. So
Yeah,
that's kind of interesting.
yeah, that's
Uh,
interesting. It
yes,
tracks a little bit with what we said here. So again, the green here, 13.5 is the portal question. So it was 0 on our poll that we just did, our snap poll. It was 13.5. So definitely the clear lowest one. Time spent on repetitive tasks. In our let's see, 42%. So 42% on our poll said manual repetitive tasks was the big thing. In this case, it was 24%. The 23.4% is time spent checking data. That in our snap poll that we just did, that was 29%. So, very like number 1 and number 2 are the same, although number 1 is now a greater margin because of this audience. And then the 19.5 is time spent extracting data from invoices, tax forms, and so on. The 17.6 is inaccurate, burdensome, or outdated processes. So I think to net it out, the survey results that we saw and the ones we just did in our snap poll line up, although the percentages vary widely
yeah.
across the organization.
Again, I think it might be a factor of the level of participants. But I think that, we've gone over a few questions, we've gone over a few survey examples and results, and I think at this point, we've really seen some common themes that have become very apparent, when considering the challenges faced for the finance office. I think there's two things that really kind of keep coming up: time and data. I think time is a critical factor, and the tasks that are taking up the most time are the manual and repetitive ones. And doing work by hand is holding back the finance office. As we discussed earlier, I think crucial time is spent manually following up on a lack of responsiveness or updating inaccurate or partially complete data. And overall challenges are themed with time and data. And the second and third most selected challenges being time spent checking and updating data and time spent extracting data from documents. So if it's taking that much time, it's most likely being done manually. So the data points to the fact that it's time for the finance office to embrace automation and drastically change the way work gets done.
Yeah,
See how
and
I
Elaine, you and I have been doing this for a long time. We've been working with finance people through most of our careers. I think what's interesting is, number one, it's evenly spread around the circle. But number two, the challenges that we saw 10 or 15 years ago are the same challenges that we have today, which I think is a little bit sad. But we're hoping to change that. Companies like Auditoria and others. This is not a commercial, but we're hoping to help you get your life back and get your time back. Stop doing the manual, repetitive stuff. So you want to walk us through some of the drill down on some of the questions, Elaine?
Yeah, so this particular one, we actually drilled more specifically into one particular area of finance. In this case, it was accounts receivable. And we asked, regarding your collections or your accounts receivable function, what are the challenges? So I think, it's similar responses are provided. When we look at these department specific areas, high accounts receivable balances was number one. So at 20%, 19% said that. I think it's clear that help is needed in the collections function, right? So almost 17% said there was insufficient tools to help in that area. And I thought it was kind of surprising. 11% stated that processing paper checks was their biggest challenge. I mean, how is that even possible in this day and age?
Mm-hmm.
They're still getting paper checks.
Yeah, that's that 10.7% right there. Yeah, that's amazing. And then the 11.2, which didn't show up in our legend over here, that is the growing number of bad debt write-offs. So again, it's cliche, cash is king, cash is the lifeblood of any organization, cash is oxygen for a firm. The fact that it's still a challenge for 11.2% of the people in 2022 is pretty amazing. So the responses, more so than any questions, they're also evenly split. And as we see the economic conditions changing this year, interest rate hikes, inflation, recession, we're hearing that over and over again. These things will probably not change in percentage relative to each other, but the pain will be more acute for the people who are actually feeling that on the front lines every day.
Yes, for sure. So our next poll question actually went over to the AP side, and we wanted to know um, regarding the vendor function, right? The vendor management function, what were the challenges? And in the results that we saw, data input continued to be a major challenge. More than a quarter, 27% of the respondents noted that the manual input of vendor invoice data to the general ledger is the biggest challenge, but not far behind was responding to vendor inquiries. So both of these functions typically handled by the AP staff, sorting through that shared inbox, manually extracting the vendor invoice data, right? I think usually the invoice data comes in and there's a lot of allocation that has to happen. Certain business divisions and units, an invoice may not be so straightforward. It might have to get divided up amongst different parts of the organization, approved by different areas. So I think all of that takes a lot of time and effort. I think sorting through that AP inbox, right, taking out that and responding to the same types of questions that come in over again, right, over and over. Inquiries like, what's the status of my invoice? What's the status of my payment? You see that over and over again. How do I log into the portal to pay? All these kinds of things that I think this AP staff members have to go through and kind of respond to individually in that shared inbox.
Yeah, and you might be asking yourself, like, why is this still an issue today? Why hasn't this problem been solved? And I think up till now, these types of tasks were not able to be automated. But that is changing because of advanced technology. Like this thing I carry around in my pocket every day has more computing power than all of the computers on planet Earth in 1960. But because we've learned to do things like speak into our phones and it understands, quote unquote understands, or many of us have home automation devices. Like I won't say her name because she'll start talking to me. But I have the Amazon one behind me. Some people have a Google Home, some people have Apple, whatever. And we're used to talking to our houses, talking to our cars, and it responds back. It quote unquote detects the intent and figures out what you want. And so that same technology is powering some of the advanced functions that we're talking about here. Also, what used to be called optical character recognition, OCR, if you're a nerd like me, that was a thing, when I was coming up in IT and later in marketing, but now that's evolved into something called computer vision. And it's where, like, if we use things like Google Photos, it can recognize faces, or it can read labels, or if there's a sign. Actually, interesting test, anybody who's an Apple or Google user, go into your photos and just type a word and like license plate or driver's license and see what comes up. So, or even type your driver's license number and see if that comes up. So I guess the technology that we have in our phones and our homes is now being brought into the finance back office. So I'll answer my own question. Why has this not been automated up till now? It's because up till around 5 years ago, this technology didn't really exist. And now it does. And I'm happy to say that we are implementing that within the finance office.
Yeah, and I think we have one more question here in terms of this section, right? And we asked, to what degree have you experienced challenges in hiring, retaining personnel? I think manual work, we definitely see that that's an issue, but we also see that hiring could be a challenge in the finance back office. Everyone here, there's a lot of talk about it, the Great Resignation. It's thrown a wrench into hiring plans across companies, 2021, 2022. But in corporate finance, more than half have been able to fill open positions within 3 months. So that's pretty good. Even so, almost 30% said it took up to half a year to fill an open position. And sadly, 6% said they were unable to fill open positions.
Yeah, that's the green up here at the top. Like 6.1% of people just kind of gave up. Like they took down the job posting. They closed the rec. That, again, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Now, Elaine, you and I talk to CFOs, controllers, CAOs all the time. In fact, I do the CFO Corner video series on our website. And, in talking to CFOs, and I'll ask them occasionally a question about hiring, like, what's it like to hire people? And the number one, everybody says it's really hard. The second thing they say is the junior accounting folk, like the college students coming out of college with accounting degrees, CPAs, CPEs, they don't want to do the work that their parents did. They don't want to do the work that was done 10, 15 years ago. They don't want to do data entry. They don't want to make sure that this column in the spreadsheet matches that column in the spreadsheet. And the one thing that I keep hearing over and over again is they don't want to call people on the phone. Like my kids don't like to use the phone at all. And they don't like to call people on the phone and ask them for money. And so, like, I'm not surprised that talent is problematic for the finance back office. Thoughts on that, Elaine?
I think you've hit on something right there. I think you got to think about the problem differently, especially in the finance back office, right? That, if talent and getting the right talent in place is a challenge and an issue, why not think about, is there other ways you can get the work done, i.e. automation? Putting something in place that can either do that kind of function or task, or just make the work that the person doing more valuable, right? So if you take away that tedious administrative manual type work and you automate it, then the work that's left is the more intelligent, sort of like higher level, more value added type of work that's more meaningful, right? So meaningful for someone, to do their job, to enjoy the work that they're doing and not be slogging down or, kind of being burdened by a lot of this sort of tedious, frankly, very boring kind of work that still needs to get done. So why not hand that off to like a smart bot or a robot or some kind of technology that can do it instead.
One more thing to add before we move on to the next poll question is that in my experience, when people are bored doing something, they get sloppy and they end up making mistakes. And data entry is a perfect example. It's something people don't like to do. They get bored doing it. They kind of resent doing it, and they don't. And people are not very good at it, to be frank with you. This is apply technology to things that technology is good at, and use human beings at what human beings are good at, which maybe a shorthand version of what you just said is like brain work, right? Give them brain work and let the technology handle the grunt work.
Yeah, agreed.
So should we move to the poll question?
Yes, we have another poll question before we're going to go to the next section, which is talking about embracing automation or stagnation. And this is our last poll question, so we're asking everyone to please participate. We'd love to get your feedback. We'd like to see the results, especially it's interesting so far in this webinar where the results have differed from what we found of the 650 people we surveyed through the State of Automation report and the people on this particular webinar today. So I think it's super interesting. We'd like to get your insights. What is the top priority for your finance back office in the next year? So where are you looking to, what is the most important thing for the coming year? Is it going to be focusing on process improvements? Is it going to be hiring new talent because of company growth? Is it improving visibility into your business outcomes? Is it investing in new technologies to improve processes? Is it replacing lost talent due to turnover? Or training team members? Now I know that you can only have 5 answers, so once that poll gets launched, let's see what these are here. So focus on process improvement, hire new talent, improve visibility, invest in new technology, or train team members for new skill sets. Okay, so those are your 5 responses. What is the top priority for your finance back office in the coming year? So if everyone could please vote.
Yeah, we're
computer. Let us know.
Had a couple in there. We had 1, so yeah, I don't want to see a bar that's like 100% and then like the rest of them are 0. But looks like okay, we got almost 40% of the people voting. Keep going, folks. We'd love to get your input.
Yeah, I think this is an easier question, right? Because you can really say, I know what I'm going to be focusing on the year because I know what pains I've had prior, right? And where we need to put our time and energy and potential budget dollars, right?
Yeah. Oh, this is very interesting, Elaine. Okay, we got 68% of the people. Let's give another 5, 10, 15 seconds. 70%.
Okay. Get your votes in.
Get your votes
American
in.
Idol. Don't let your person go home. Don't let your priority go home.
All right. So that is super interesting. Like invest in new technologies to improve processes. Man, I think my heart just grew 3 sizes, Elaine.
Yes.
That's awesome. And then focus on process improvements is another great one. So it's awesome. Hiring talent, that got 0. That's amazing to me that like maybe people are starting to think about like technology, and maybe you've done a great job today, Elaine, helping people understand that you don't have to hire people. You can actually have technology solve this problem for you. So that's pretty interesting. And then improve visibility, train team members, also pretty good. So any thoughts on this one before we move to what our results said?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising. Okay, I think in looking at this, process improvements and new technologies kind of go hand in hand, right? even you could even go so far as to say they could be a very similar question, right? So invest in new technologies to improve processes and focus on process improvements, they would go hand in hand. So not surprising, those are the two ones that got the most attention. Train new team members, 7%. I think that that's actually very interesting as well. And if we pull up the results on the next slide from our survey, I think this one is the first response that almost aligns directly with the responses we got from our survey. The number one answer was focus on process improvements. So it's slightly different, but they were very close, right? So invest in new technologies was the audience here today, but focus on process improvements was the audience that we had surveyed for the automation report. I think, again, it got cut off a little bit. We apologize for that. But replace the talent was the green section, no, the blue section that says 6.5%. That was replace talent. So again, those kind of align very close, 6.5, 7%, so that relatively close there in terms of that. Improve visibility into business outcomes, 14%, and it was 17%. So again, relatively close, right? So even though just under half of the finance had basic levels of automation, right? If we go back to results that we talked about earlier, more than half the respondents said that focusing on process improvements and investing in new technologies to improve processes are the two top priorities for the finance back office. And I think both now are what you would call those table stakes, right? Mm-hmm. For finance professionals wanting to implement artificial intelligence and a surefire way to, start on a solid automation journey in the finance office. And I think the finance departments that do not have automation, they're going to be the slowest to adopt automation, and they're also going to be put behind even further. But the ones who have started to incorporate technology, and kudos to the audience here, right? I think they're the ones who are going to gain that competitive advantage and really kind of stay out in the forefront and continue to grow and expand and do well in business as a result.
Yeah, and in the Snap poll we just did, 43% said invest in new technology versus 20%. So more than double of the audience on this call said they plan to invest in new technology. Focusing on process improvement, 34.6%. Our survey was about 30. The Snap poll we just did was 36%. So that tracks along very well. But yeah, that 20%. I think the cover of our book is, the future of finance has arrived. It's no longer a thing of tomorrow. It's here, and people are using technology to figure out how can we change the processes in the finance office so we don't have to keep replacing people. So I think it's time to kind of bring us home to our final couple of charts. And you want to take it away, Elaine?
Yes. So this last chart, this is the last chart where we're going to share the results. Our survey has all the questions and all the results. The report will talk about a lot of the things that we saw more in depth and sort of more analysis about the results. So we encourage you, to take a look at the survey when you get an opportunity. But the question here was when asked what technology respondents were planning on implementing in the next 6 months to a year, analytics and reporting led the pack with a fifth of those surveys responding with the area of focus. It's funny, Nick, I'm almost like, I wish I would have poll question to ask the people here today, because I wonder if it would be very similar answers or if it would be slightly different. And that was followed closely by, the second, area of technology in the next 6 to 12 months was actually cash performance management. So, forecasting and that kind of thing. So analytics and forecasting definitely. One is, looking back to see where you've been to make better decisions about the future, and one is trying to get a better, vision on the future so that you can make the right decisions also. So I think it all comes down to decisions. Your thoughts, Nick?
Yeah, and then back to my nautical analogy, in order to steer your boat, you need to know what your position is. What's your course and speed? What's your direction? And so not surprising that analytics and reporting is the top one. Cash performance, again, cash is king, cash is lifeblood, cash is oxygen. That's like totally get that. The other ones that, just so the folks on this call know, that 12.2% is accounts receivable variance. You can see that, followed by automated vendor invoice scanning at 11.5%. Payment processing through invoice factoring is 10%. Credit management 9.7%, and spend analytics is 9.3%. So, then the 8.2 is two-way or three-way matching. So very kind of more tactical thing. So again, based on this audience here, I would not be surprised if this lined up with if we did a poll question on this one next time, that we'd probably see a similar number 1 and number 2. I'd bet you a lunch on that one, Elaine.
Oh gosh, and there's no way to follow up on that bet, Nick. Nice one. Well, we've talked a lot about the challenges. We've talked a lot about these themes, time and data, right? So let's talk about some practical next steps to get started on an automation journey. I think, and we can kind of break this out, Nick. I'll take a pass at this particular one, but you want to start on a journey. You have to decide and focus. There's some key areas. There's so much that you could do, but there's some things you really need to take in consideration. The first one is to cloud or not to cloud, right? If you have an on-premise system, moving to the cloud is the first step. It's no longer if, it's when. You've got to be in the cloud. That is where all the technology is moving towards. That's where you're going to get the most advantages. That's where you're going to really see the difference in software that's going to be able to be updated, new releases, patches and fixes, all those things. Everything's going to be more efficient and more economical if you move to the cloud. Secondly, traditional versus innovative architecture, right? So you really want to identify a cloud-based financial management system that embraces innovative technology. You want to look for something that's easy to implement and that you can quickly take advantage of in order to get that return on your investment. You have to consider lift and shift versus transformation, right? So, conduct audits of your back office processes. Understand the day-to-day activities throughout your back office. Determine what should and could be transformed. Don't just automate the current process. Don't just, put automation in place right over the things that you're doing. You need to understand how you're doing it, but then understand what's the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And if you put that together in your plan and execute the automation around that, looking towards what it is you're trying to do, not how you're currently doing it, then you're going to get a lot more out of your automation implementation. I think you also need to develop upskilling strategies, right? Automation opens up some great opportunities for finance and accounting professionals. It's going to help them contribute to business strategy rather than just, performing, excuse me, data input. So make a plan for how you're going to retrain your current employees, and then how you might look to hire employees with a certain skill set, a certain more technical or data-driven or data analytics-driven skill set. And then lastly, I would say, capitalize on this opportunity. Automation in the finance back office, it translates to dollar figures, right? A reduction in day sales outstanding because you put automation in place, you drop that down by 2 or 3 days. That's going to be additional freed up cash flow, right? It's going to allow your business to take that money that you see much more quickly and reinvest it into new business opportunities, whether that's growth and expansion, whether it's research and development, whatever it is. It's going to give you an advantage if you can collect that money faster, if you can reduce your sales outstanding, and automation can help you get there. Okay, so having talked about practical next steps for automation, let's talk about the key the key takeaways that from overall all these questions, all this information that we've shared with you today. I think number one, I will take turns, Nick. So number one, many of the challenges, things that we've seen, the repetitive work, the manual tasks, all the follow-ups that keep going on, this can be resolved by implementing automation. You can overcome blockers such as this clerical administrative work. You can drive standardization and accuracy across the finance function. You can automate repetitive tasks, and that's going to allow for some dynamic data aggregation, extraction, and transformation. And that's going to help have a more enriched environment and greater visibility and collaboration among teams and functions.
Yeah, and the key benefits, as you mentioned, like transparency, efficiency, and accuracy, delivered through automation, will recover thousands of hours in the back office.
Yes, and I think if you transform finance by using the latest and most innovative technologies, such as cloud data ops, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, all those are going to help you improve cash performance, drive greater margins, and achieve the greatest impact with the quickest ROI. So that's all going to help you mitigate risk and fraud and accelerate decision-making. We talked about how decision-making is super important. It's going to make you and your teams be smarter, have smarter, more precise insights to be able to make faster and more precise decisions.
Yeah, and if we could just build out this slide, we could just kind of fill it all out here. So last but not least, you can get started with practical steps. Have a good vendor evaluation and a thorough change management plan. And then, as we say, preparation is the key to success. So, the pace of business demands faster and therefore shorter cycle times, which requires finance to operate with greater agility. Because of this pace, data and processes have to be standardized, simplified, creating more time to focus on what we talked about today: analysis, strategy, the brain work, right? And then underpinning all of this requires a workforce shift and embracing new ways of working to bring that greater efficiency to the back office. And with that, I think you can hand it back to Neil, who can walk us through a little Q&A today.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you. We've got some questions coming in from the audience. Just a reminder to, again, please use the GoToWebinar control panel to ask a question. So got a couple coming in here. Let me start with, is there an area of finance you recommend as a best place to automate as an initial step?
We'll take a shot at that one, Elaine?
Sure. I think that there's two areas, right? One of the ones we talked about, it got highlighted a couple times in this survey, and that's collections. Getting your cash in faster, collecting payments more quickly. I think those are all easy win areas where if there's lots of automation solutions out there, just about anyone who has a solution in the AR space, whatever software company it is, has a collections solution. And so go out there, look and see what these different vendors have to offer, and have that as a quick win. Something that can be easily implemented, put in place, and you can start seeing significant impact very quickly. That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Nick?
Yeah, and then there's a lot of great point solutions that are out there. They're great, AP solutions like accounts payable process automation. A lot of that in place already, as you pointed out, Elaine. AR. So from my perspective, one of the most inefficient things is the ingestion of PDFs, invoices, and things like that, and also secondly, responding to those email inquiries. So filling in the gaps, that communication is super inefficient. It's time consuming. That stat I mentioned earlier on the webcast, 5 to 8 days is what it takes people to respond to an incoming email, especially when people are just saying, how can I pay you? So yeah. I think those are areas you should really think about. Lots of great vendors, and I would say contact us if you're looking for a recommendation of a vendor to explore.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you for that. I know we were talking about the daily news about COVID and how fast it's spreading these days. So a question related to that is, it seems like hybrid and remote workplace is potentially here to stay. How does automation support that or make it difficult?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So 2 years ago when we all got sent home from the office, we had a couple of quarters of consternation, like how are we going to close the books remotely? How do we do audits remotely? How can we manage the finance office remotely? And I think we've gotten better over the last 2 years, through Zoom and other collaboration tools, Slack and others that that we've reached some efficiency points there. I think that to push a little bit more on that collaboration point, I think that there will be another category. There are companies today like Auditoria, and there are other companies that are emerging every day that are focused on streamlining that communication, like allowing those remote teams to be able to collaborate, communicate, putting smart bots on the front line of collections and dunning, putting smart bots on the front line of AP help desk or AR help desk, and handling like 80 to 90% of emails that come in. Once you take that stuff off people's plates, well, then now your remote work becomes almost a non-issue. It's like, then how do you keep people motivated? How do you keep the morale up? Which is more of an HR function than it is a finance
culture function, right? Yeah.
Exactly. What were your thoughts, Elaine?
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that there's just the hybrid workplace, there's a lot of pros and cons. I see it all the time now, tons of articles on this whole thing where, okay, there's those who are now demanding everybody go back to the office. There's those that are saying, no, I want to, I like the fact that I don't commute, or I can, easily be here at my desk and I'm more productive, but I miss the camaraderie of being with others, right? It can go back and forth. But I think that the role that automation plays is that it makes it, we can actually work from home and do it very well because there are systems, collaboration systems in place, because there's automation that's taking place for certain things. I honestly think that it's not a either or type thing. It's going to be really based on the role that you have within the organization. There's some functions that might need to be in the office full time. It just doesn't matter what it is, they have to be there. And there's some functions that could be remote the entire time and they would never have to go to the office. So I think there's also a roles-based element to it. And also how much of the work that they do can be automated, right? To help them if they're working from home or even if they're at the office. So.
Yeah.
I have a question for Madam Ream. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Any examples of systems that we can use for automation?
Well, I'll take the first shot at that one. So there's different categories, right? So if you're a large enterprise company that wants to build it yourself, there are robotic process automation companies, RPA tools. You can just Google them. I'm not paid by any of those companies, but you can figure out who they are. There's probably 2 or 3 really big ones that are RPA. You have ERP or accounting software vendors. I will say them because everybody knows who they are. It's Sage Intacct, it's NetSuite, it's Oracle, it's SAP, Workday Financial Management. Others. So the ERPs will provide you with some degree of automation. Now, those, I'll say this: I love those companies. I used to work for one, but they weren't built for automation, really. I mean, they weren't, and they certainly weren't built for AI-based or machine learning-based automation. But there is a category of companies, like us, Auditoria. If you were to go to the Sage Intacct marketplace or the Oracle NetSuite marketplace, and you can see a whole bunch of automation companies that focus on AP and AR and collaboration and other things. So there are many, many companies that plug into and are compatible with those ERP vendors. So it really depends on what you're starting with. What's your accounting software? If you're on QuickBooks, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody can help you. Maybe they can, but typically smaller companies are on QuickBooks. If you're a mid-market company, you're probably on one of the mid-market ERP systems. If you're an enterprise company, you're probably on one of the big ones. So depending on which ERP system you're starting with, that's going to more or less determine where you end up with the adjacent products that connect to your ERP system.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick because we're coming up on the time that
Yes.
an organization, you ask yourself this questions, right? Do you have high volumes? Do you have high volumes of invoices, high volumes of payments, high volumes of transactions, high volumes of emails? If you have high volumes of any of those things, then automation will absolutely save you time, money, effort, resources, all sorts of things. Because those high volumes, anything that's high volume, that's where automation plays and makes the best return on the investment. Because putting an automation solution in place is going to allow you to get a ton of time back when you have high volumes, because technology can process it so much more quickly than any human could and do a much better job at it, be more accurate, never have to sleep, doesn't have to take time off. So technology can really have a huge impact if you have high volumes. So as an organization, if you're looking for solutions, there's tons out there, Auditoria being one of them, of course, that can provide you some automation to help you with these kinds of processes, especially if you have high volumes of fill in the blank. So.
All right, well, let's move on to, here is an overview of Auditoria.
Yep, I'll do it in 30 seconds, Neil, because we're right at time. So Auditoria connects with your system of engagement, your system of record, your email systems, your ERP system. We streamline that communication with your customers, vendors, employees. We can extract data. We can create prioritized work lists for your team, communicate omnidirectionally with all of your team and your external stakeholders, manage your tasks and workflows, and analyze your trends, your metrics, and overall cash performance. That's the commercial for Auditoria. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
And
Yes.
I love the word smart bots acting as junior accounting assistants. That's awesome. So with that, I'd like to share Elaine and Nick's contact information for your, if you want to get in contact with these experts. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Elaine and Nick, and our sponsor, Auditoria AI, leader in finance back office automation. And thanks to all of our attendees, and great success to you in 2022. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.